So this is lecture 3 of part 2 of Josephus, historian and Bible commentator. And today, having looked last time at the internecine fighting among the rebels and the final campaign of Vespasian to basically subdue the country except for Jerusalem and a couple of fortresses. Today we are now shifting to what was another hiatus in the war, namely the civil war that broke out in Rome, in which Vespasian eventually emerges as the emperor. And so this is commonly called the Year of the Four Emperors, which takes place from March of 68 to December 69. But it actually has its roots several years before that. And if you take a look at the chronology, and here is who is the emperor at the beginning, Nero. What happens is that in the latter part of Nero's reign, there is a tremendous discontent among the ruling classes in Rome over what appears to be erratic and despotic rule of Nero. And so in 65, there is a conspiracy by a guy named Gaius Calpurnius Piso to overthrow Nero. Now, through a series of events which we know from Tacitus and Suetonius, who are writing a lot, like 50 years afterwards, the plot is revealed. And I think Tacitus admits the fact that he's not even 100% sure exactly of the details of it. But the plot gets revealed, and there are approximately 41 individuals who were accused of being part of the conspiracy, which included 19 senators, 7 equites, that means people from the equine or knight class, which is the one below the nobility, 11 soldiers and 4 women. And most were executed, forced to commit suicide. They were exiled or denigrated, meaning they were lowered in their social class from what they were above. And the feeling was that Nero, that some of the people who got accused and executed were, innocent. It caused a tremendous amount of discontent. So there is this bubbling under the surface even before the war in Judea begins. By the way, there also was a major revolt in 60-61 in Britain. Anybody who knows of the famous British war leader Boudica, or however her name is pronounced, Boadicea, some people called her. There's a whole disagreement exactly what her name was. She led this major revolt in 60-61 against the Romans in Britain, and to the point where Nero was actually considering withdrawing Romans from Britain. But what happens it really begins in March of 68, where there is a revolt by Vindex, who is the governor of Gaul. And Vespasian hears about this, and we'll see, and I believe it or not, I forgot my Josephus. We're going to read this, because Josephus actually gives a pretty good account of this year and what happens in it, even though it's more fully in Tacitus and Vespasian. Tacitus is incredibly detailed as to the various battles and bloodletting and all this kind of stuff. Josephus gives a very good summary, and he even says, I'm not going to tell you everything. If you want it, you can go read it in somebody else. But what's interesting is that the Tacitus was writing 20 years after. Both of them are writing like 20 years, 30 years after Josephus. But the point is that a revolt breaks out by the governor of Gaul, and Gaul, of course, is one of the most important provinces of the Roman Empire outside of Italy. And what happens is that, according to Josephus, Vespasian decides to try and end the war quickly to see what is going on. And I think here we're going to go to Josephus and start, looking at what he has to say. If you don't mind, Suzanne, sharing with Irma. So we're going to go to the War, Book 4, Chapter 8. And on page 821, and it's line 440. And here is where Josephus himself, having just talked about the final campaign of Vespasian in Judea, and now goes back. He's now doing a digression and he's going to talk about what's happening with the situation in Rome, because this is going to have a direct impact on the war. So, Suzanne, you want to pick it up? This is again chapter 8, book 4, chapter 8, paragraph 1, line 440 on page 821 at the bottom.
In the meantime, an account came that there were commotions in Gaul, and that Vindex, together with the men of power in that country, had revolted from Nero, which affair is more accurately described elsewhere. This report thus related to Vespasian excited him to go on briskly with the war, for he foresaw already the civil wars which were coming upon them, nay, that the very government was in danger. And he thought, if he could first reduce the eastern parts of the empire to peace, he should make the fears for Italy the lighter.
So, I mean, this is hindsight, 100%. So did Vespasian actually feel that way? Well, maybe he did. Maybe Josephus talked to Vespasian about it. And in fact, Vespasian being an ambitious guy and the most important military commander in the entire Eastern Empire, maybe he did see that this might be some kind of possibility for advancement. And so he wants to make sure that there's no other business going on in his, it's quite possible, yeah.
So the war he's trying to end quickly is the war in Palestine.
Exactly, the Judean war. He wants to settle that because it's very important to settle it, given the strategic, position there.
The second thing is, I had another question about the revolt in Gaul.
Yeah.
Since it's coming from not, it's coming from the leader of Gaul. He's revolting against the Roman rule.
No, he's the governor. He's a Roman.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's the rule that's going on in Rome.
Yeah.
Because Gaul is out in the hinterland, how much control, how much direct, would he be affected by what Nero was doing?
A lot, because it had to do, and don't forget, to be the governor of Gaul is a major position. He has military forces at his beck and call. He's probably he has friends and relatives in Rome. He's in probably contact with the political groups in Rome, and there was a huge problem with taxation, which would affect him in his own personal fortunes. So, being the governor of Gaul, maybe he sees an opportunity here. And don't forget, Caligula was assassinated, so it's not like there isn't a precedent for a revolt. Now, there hadn't been a civil war in the empire since the time of the defeat of Mark Antony by Octavius, who became Augustus. So that's more than 60 years before that, right? 70 years. So it'd been relatively peaceful. I mean, aside from the revolts in various places that occasionally broke out, or the wars with the Parthians, there was no real major internal strife in the empire.
Yeah, but that 60 or 70 years previously was close enough to be in memory of something that they...
Yeah, and as I said, Caligula got assassinated, so that wasn't that far, 2 emperors before, right? Okay. All right, let's carry on.
Okay, while therefore the winter was his hindrance from going into the field, he put garrisons into the villages and smaller cities for their security. He put decurions also into the villages and centurions into the cities. He, besides this, rebuilt many of the cities that had been laid waste.
So he's consolidating his forces. Don't worry, guys. I got late, too, because of the traffic, so we just basically got started a few minutes ago.
Full will get messed.
Oh, I know. I got off and went around. Okay, so he's consolidating his forces, and he's putting officers of various ranks in garrisoning the towns and cities and rebuilding some of the places that had been destroyed in the fighting. Go on. But at the beginning of the spring.
But at the beginning of the spring, he took the greatest part of his army and led it from Caesarea to Antipatris, where he spent 2 days in settling affairs of that city. And then, on the third day, he marched on, laying waste and burning all the neighboring villages. And when he had laid waste all the places about the toparchy of Tamnas, he passed on to Lydda and Jamnia. And when both those cities had come over to him, he placed a great many of those that had come over to him from other places as inhabitants therein.
Okay, we can stop with this because the next part of this chapter is really about he's doing some final, we actually have read some of this, mopping up. The end of this paragraph 3 is about how, and 4 talks about the Dead Sea and how he throws some people in the Dead Sea to see how they float. If you go to chapter 9, he's now preparing to lay siege to Jerusalem. He has surrounded Jerusalem. He has cut Jerusalem off. We're on page 824. Yeah. He has cut Jerusalem off. He was all set to go. And now we go to chapter 9, paragraph 2. And before that, let's just go back to the chronology on page 1. What happens is that in May of 68, you have Gaul, and then you have the main body of the Roman army in that part of the world is on the Rhine, right, facing the German tribes. And actually the Romans still occupied parts east of the Rhine, but not that far. In other words, they had been in the process of trying to occupy earlier on in, decades before, in the time of Augustus. The Romans, in fact, had occupied a considerable amount of territory east of the Rhine, but after the big, huge defeat in the Teutoburg Forest, they'd pull back. And the Rhine was the major border, but they still had some areas where they were east of the Rhine and did so until the 2nd century, when they finally pulled back and the Rhine became the absolute border. If you go to the area of Germany called the Odenwald, which I was in last April, which is southeast of Frankfurt, you go east of the Rhine and some 50, 60 miles inland, there are remains of Roman defensive lines. But they pulled back in the 2nd century. So, but the main body of the Roman army is on the Rhine legions, and those were some of the most important and toughest, best trained, experienced soldiers the Roman Empire had. So in 68, when Vindex has revolted against Nero, the Rhine legions refuse to join him, and they defeat and kill him in battle.
So who did he have?
He had his own army.
He had his own army.
He had his own armies, but don't forget, the commanders of the Rhine legions said, no, we're not going to revolt against Nero. So Vindex is killed. That doesn't end the problem. All right, so now we're in paragraph 2 of chapter 9, line 491. On page 824. And Suzanne, why don't you just pick it up from there? Now as Vespasian
was returned to Caesarea.
So in other words, he's got Jerusalem surrounded, but he goes back to the main Roman base, to Caesarea, to probably reorganize, arrest some of his troops, and to prepare for the siege. Because it's now the spring, okay? We're talking now June 68. Go on.
And was getting ready with all his army to march directly to Jerusalem. He was informed that Nero was dead, after he had reigned 13 years and 8 days. But as to any narration about what manner he abused his power in the government, and committed the management of affairs to those vile wretches, Nymphidius and Tigellinus, his unworthy freedmen, and how he had a plot laid against him by them, and was deserted by all his guards, and ran away with 4 of his most trusty freedmen, and slew himself in the suburbs of Rome, and how those that occasioned his death were, in no long time, brought themselves to punishment, how also the war in Gaul ended, and how Galba was made emperor.
Okay, so let's stop there for a minute. He's giving you a very, very quick, sort of overview. He's assuming that you know fairly well but here's Galba, and followed him was Otho and then Vitellius. So these are the 3 who are going to follow Nero. But the critical, here we want to take a look at the material on page 2. And I'm sorry the map is not great because I couldn't reproduce it in color. But here it is in full color. This represents, in the empire, where the different commanders had their bases of support. Okay? So if you take a look, Galba basically is Spain. Okay? Again, one of the really important provinces, long conquered, long occupied. So Galba is centered in Hispania. Here it's called Tarraconaesus. All right? That's his base of operations. Otho has a smaller base of operations in parts of Spain and Portugal. Believe it or not, it's called Lusitania. Sounds something out of a Marx Brothers movie. Vitellius is based in the German provinces, Gaul and Britain. He is a very powerful commander and has the loyalty of the legions of these really important, the Rhine legions, Gaul, Britain, this whole area here. Now, Vespasian ultimately ends up with Egypt, Syria, very important, and he gains support of the Danube legions. In other words, the other important river border of the Romans is the Danube. In other words, if you take a look, you've got the Rhine running more or less north-south, and the Danube running east and west, forming a kind of corner, and those become the borders of the Roman Empire with some adjustment. Again, the river only becomes an absolute border later on, but what you have are these really important large military have to be along the Danube to prevent incursions from the north into what we would call today, the Balkan area, the Balkan states and Greece. So Vespasian, as you will see, gains the support of the commanders on the Danube, which is really important because they're a lot closer to Italy than his forces in Syria and Israel and Egypt. Okay, so Galba's the first to take control. All right?
Take control of his territory.
Take control and become proclaimed emperor. What happens is, if you go back to the chronology, Nero dies. He's declared a public enemy by the Senate on June 8th of 68, and Nero dies on June the 9th, and Galba is declared emperor. And it's, how that happens is, there's all kinds of complex machinations going on in Rome over this. But Galba is declared, because at the moment he seems to be the most capable commander, he is declared emperor. Okay? So, what happens is, if you go to on the chronology, Vespasian suspends the campaign because at this point there's a new emperor he has to wait further instructions. All right? And that's what he says. Because what happens is that Galba comes from Spain, goes to Rome. We're going to just wait a little bit now because, again, he pushes everything into a very short time. So we're just going to skip a little bit. And if you look at 496, he says, I've omitted to give an exact account of them because they are well known by and described by a great number. 496 on page 824 at the bottom. But they are described by a great number of Greek and Roman authors, yet for the sake of the connection of the matters, that my history may not be incoherent, I have just touched upon everything briefly. Okay, so Irma, you want to pick it up in line 497.
Wherefore Vespasian put off at first his expedition against Jerusalem, and stood waiting whether the emperor would be transferred after the death of Nero. Moreover, when he heard that Galba was made emperor, he attempted nothing till he also should send him some directions about the war. However, he sent his son Titus to him, to salute him, and to receive his commands about the Jews. Upon the very same errand did King Agrippa sail along with Titus to Galba.
Okay, so Vespasian suspends the war. He sends Titus, and Herod Agrippa II goes with him. They are on their way to Rome as the envoys from Vespasian to sort of swear allegiance and to get further instructions about what they should do. And that's exactly what happens. But in meantime, in November of 68, Vitellius is named governor of Germania Inferior, meaning Lesser Germany. And in January of 69, the legions of the Rhine refused to recognize Galba as emperor and proclaim Vitellius emperor. This is now a serious civil war. All right? Now, what happens is that January 15th, Galba is killed by the Praetorian Guard. The Praetorian Guard being the personal forces of the emperor, who themselves were both a powerful military and political force in the city of Rome itself. And what happened? Well, read on, but as they were sailing, so here is Titus and Herod Agrippa going on their way to Rome, line 499, but as they were sailing
in their long ships by the coast of Achaia, for it was wintertime, they heard that Galba was slain before they could get to him, after he had reigned 7 months and as many days.
Okay, so there, you can't, in the winter, you're not going to go directly across, you're going to hug the coast because of the weather, and they hear in the process that Galba's dead. Go on.
After whom Otho took the government and undertook the management of public affairs. So Agrippa resolved to go on to Rome without any terror on account of the change in the government. But Titus, by a divine impulse, sailed back from Greece to Syria and came in great haste to Caesarea to his father. And now they were both in suspense about the public affairs, that the Roman Empire, being then in a fluctuating condition, and did not go on with their expedition against the Jews, but thought that to make any attack upon foreigners was now unreasonable on the account of the solicitude they were in for their own country.
And he's like trying to put them in the Titus is smart. He says, and of course, if you go back to the chart,
Titus is smart
because he knows that there's no point in carrying on to Rome. He better go back to his father because situation has become so fluid.
It's nice to tell Dad to get ready to take over.
Well, exactly. What are we going to do, Dad? All right? Remember, Titus is his number 2 guy, and he's an adult and one of his major commanders at this point. So if you go back to the chart, in April, Vitellius has gathered the Rhine legions and the forces from Gaul, and he invades Italy. And if you read Tacitus, It's this unbelievable campaign where the entire city of Cremona is reduced to ashes and tens of thousands of people are killed. In other words, there's this incredible bloody fighting going on in northern Italy, where, one of the major cities is completely destroyed, and Otho's forces come north, and Vitellius defeats him at what's called the First Battle of Bedracum, or Bedriacum in northern Italy. And Otho commits suicide, and Vitellius is proclaimed emperor. Okay? So now we got number 3. But that doesn't end things. All right? If you take a look back to
Sounds like a simple.
494, no, it's bloody civil war, because once Nero's killed, like, all bets are off. Everybody's jockeying for power, and the commanders of the legions are all, any one of them could become emperor. So what happens is that, after one of the reasons why Galba was they refused to the legions because he didn't pay them well. He didn't pay them what they were promised. So and he was slain by treachery in the middle of the marketplace, and then Otho becomes it, and then this is going back to line 495 in the previous page, his expedition against the commanders of Vitellius, his destruction thereupon, and then what he tells you is, of course, is Vitellius, comes into Rome, and he doesn't do so well either. But the point is, it's only in July that Vespasian hears that Vitellius has been made emperor. So if we go forward, because now he's going back to the fighting with the with the various factions, but then if you go to where are we here? Chapter 10. Here you're going to see he goes, after having talked about, again, the internecine fighting in Jerusalem for a bit, he now goes back to the Civil War. And here he's going to, again, he's focused on Vespasian, but he's now going to give us a little bit of what happens after Vitellius becomes emperor. So, Irma, you want to pick it up? We're on 829, book 4, chapter 10, paragraph 1, line 585, now at this very time.
Now, about this very time it was that heavy calamities came about Rome on all sides. For Vitellius was come from Germany with his soldiery.
It's Vitellius.
Vitellius.
Well, it's actually Vitellius. It's spelled differently here. Yeah, go on.
And drew along with him a great multitude of other men besides. And when the spaces allotted for soldiers could not contain them, he made all Rome itself his camp, and filled all the houses with armed men. Which men, when they saw the riches of Rome with those eyes which had never seen such riches before, and found themselves shown round about on all sides with silver and gold, they had much ado to contain their covetous desires, and were ready to betake themselves to plunder, and to the slaughter of such as should stand in their way. And this was the state of affairs in Italy at that time.
So, in other words, Vitellius' army comes and occupies Rome, and of course they start acting like an occupying army, right? I mean, they want to plunder the place, which isn't going to make people happy, right? Yeah. But now, so then he flips back to Vespasian.
But when Vespasian had overthrown all the places that were near to Jerusalem, he returned to Caesarea and heard of the troubles that were at Rome, and that Vitellius was emperor. This produced indignation in him, although he well knew how to be governed as well as to govern, and could not with any satisfaction own him for his lord, who had acted so madly and seized upon the government as if it were absolutely destitute of a governor.
So Josephus is impugning to Vespasian great moral indignation
Yeah.
of the behavior of Vitellius, because again, it was an incredibly bloody campaign that brought Vitellius from Germany and Gaul into Italy and defeating Otho's forces and down into Rome. So this is all by hindsight. Remember, 15, 20 years later, he's writing during the time of Domitian. By the time he's writing this, I'm pretty sure Titus is also dead. He's defending the motives of Vespasian for wanting to become, emperor, basically. Go on.
Yeah. And as this sorrow of his was violent, he was not able to support the torments he was under, nor to apply himself farther in other wars when his native country was laid waste. But then, as much as his passion excited him to avenge his country, so much was he restrained by the consideration of his distance therefrom, because fortune might prevent him and do a world of mischief before he could himself sail over the sea to Italy, especially as it was still the winter season. So he restrained his anger, how vehement soever it was at this time.
I find it odd because it's not the winter. This is the spring. I don't get that. He's got this a little wrong here. But all right. So then, Cal, do you want to pick it up at number 3, because now we're going to see that now his troops under him and this is not unusual, by the way, that the forces of these regional commanders would want to get their guy to become emperor, because of course it meant advancement for them, right? So this is where the soldiers of Vespasian are quite upset by what had happened, and they're now talking. They're gonna, they want to get involved.
Before we go, reading Josephus' account of history makes it so personal.
Yes.
Yeah, it makes it much more interesting than
Yes.
all the ancient history we studied in school.
Yeah.
Well,
as I said, I was going to try and give you a passage from Tacitus, but it's just so much involved with the battles and the commanders and who had fought there and what happened and who got killed and the bloody, and it was like, if you want the blow by blow of the military stuff, go read Tacitus's history of this, which is incredibly detailed. Suetonius tends to focus more on the figure of the person and less on, it's more of a biography and less on the day-to-day things. Tacitus is pretty good, but Tacitus is writing around 105, so he's writing 15, 20 years after Josephus, and he doesn't know the principles. They're all long gone, where Josephus knew the Vespasian and Titus, and probably many of their commanders as well, right? Many of the senior officers he became familiar with, and he has access to their personal written accounts.
But also, this is a classic case of history being written by the victim.
Absolutely,
sure.
absolutely.
Because what you get here is he's implying only the finest of motives.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
He is definitely trying to put the Flavians in the best possible light here.
Oh, yeah.
And when we
the
get
other thing is, which I've noticed so far, is it's not Vespasian who says, guys, this is what we're going to do. It's the guy saying, Vespasian, you got to make it good for us. Because, right.
Yeah, but all history, to me anyway, has some bias to it. Even the descriptions of the battles are biased.
Absolutely.
Here it's so obvious that it makes it interesting.
Yes, and it's very typical, that he has to be courted by his own men to go. But notice, he hears about and it's true, by the way, there was a lot of devastation in Italy from the fighting between the forces of Otho and Vitellius. I mean, there really was. Tacitus describes it, whole parts of the countryside are being laid waste because once you get an army loose there, I mean, they don't, care who they're fighting. It's a pretty bloody situation with a lot of devastation to the Roman, as the armies of Vitellius had entered Italy and fought the forces of Otho. So what Josephus is giving Vespasian is he hears about the devastation of his country. Well, it's true. I mean,
Yeah.
All right, Cal, do you want to pick it up in paragraph 3, but now as commanders?
But now his commanders and soldiers met in several companies, and consulted openly about changing the public affairs, and out of their indignation cried out how, at Rome there are soldiers that live delicately, and when they have not ventured so much as to hear the fame of war, they ordain whom to please for our governors.
Whom they please, it should be.
Whom they please for our governors, and in hopes of gain make them emperors. While you, who have gone through so many labors, and are grown into years under your helmets, give leave to others to use such a power, when yet you have among yourselves one more worthy to rule than any whom they have set up. Now, what juster opportunity shall they ever have of requiting their generals if they do not make use of that which is now before them? While there is so much juster reason for Vespasian's being emperor than for Vitellius, as they are themselves more deserving than those that made the other emperors, for that they have undergone as great wars as have the troops that came from Germany, nor are they inferior in war to those that have brought the tyrant to Rome. Nor
That tyrant, meaning Vitellius.
to Rome. Nor have they undergone smaller labors than they.
So this is interesting. His officers are claiming, why do the Germanic legions deserve to have the power and the plunder? We're the ones who fought longer, and you are a better commander than Vitellius. He doesn't have the military experience that you do. Who's truly worthy to do this? And of course they have their own personal pride, right? And by the way, I mean, if you look this up, we know exactly which legions Vitellius had. Which were the legions that supported Galba, which were the legions that supported Otho, which were the legions that supported Vitellius, which were the ones that Vespasian. We actually know, and each of those we know a certain amount of the history of those legions and who were their commanders. It's quite fascinating. So, you can trace to a certain extent, where were the legions from originally, who, again, by this point, a lot of them were not Italians from the Italian peninsula. A lot of them were people from the hinterland, especially if a legion had been stationed in a particular place for a long period of time. So there's a lot of pride in the legions for them and their commanders. And don't forget, Vespasian, he's been a very successful commander, right? Okay, read on. For that neither will
the Roman Senate nor people bear such a lascivious emperor as Vitellius, if he be compared with their chaste Vespasian.
Notice. Vitellius is lascivious and profligate, and Vespasian is chaste and noble, right? Okay, go on. Nor will they endure
a most barbarous tyrant instead of a good governor, nor choose one that hath no child to preside over them, instead of him that is a father. Because the advancement of men's own children to dignities is certainly the greatest security kings can have for themselves.
All right, now we know from other sources that Vitellius in fact had children, okay, but here, this is a bit of a piece of rhetoric that, notice Vespasian, by being a father, will be a father to his people, and this image of the emperor as the father of the nation is one that was cultivated by Augustus very, very strongly. So that becomes an important theme in sort of the imperial imagery, right? Read a little further.
Whether, therefore, we estimate the capacity of governing from the skill of a person in years, we ought to have Vespasian, or whether from the strength of a young man, we ought to have Titus. For by this means we shall have the advantage of both their ages, for that they will afford strength to those that shall be made emperor.
Okay, so notice Titus is coming off good too here. This is important, as we will see, that one of the fascinating things is how positive Josephus portrays Titus. We're not going to talk so much about it now, but this is going to become a very important element in because he's trying to really absolve Titus of what obviously for Jews he is a horrible villain, having destroyed the temple. Josephus sounds like he was a personal friend of Titus, that they became close, and all the portrayals of Titus and Josephus are positive. All of them. And if we hopefully we'll get there, I've given you a chunk of Suetonius's discussion of Titus, but that's the segue into this back to the siege. But go on. For they will afford strength.
For that they will afford strength to those that shall be made emperors, they having already 3 legions, besides other auxiliaries from the neighboring kings, and will have farther all the armies in the east to support them, as also those in Europe, so far as they are out of the distance and dread of Vitellius, and besides such auxiliaries as they may have in Italy itself.
And this is definitely reading things back, because at this point, does Vespasian know that the Danube legions are going to come on his side or not? That's an interesting question. Josephus is implying yes, but I'm not so sure about that. In other words, Vespasian hasn't declared himself yet. And it's only after he declares himself, and how did he get the support of the Danube legions? I'm not sure, but the fact is, Josephus is in effect saying that the support was already there, and I'm not sure about that. Go on.
That is Vespasian's brother and his other son Domitian.
Yeah, who's in Rome. Okay, Domitian is in Rome. That's going to become very important, by the way, in what follows. Go on.
The one of whom will bring in a great many of those young men that are of dignity, while the other is entrusted with the government of the city, which office of his will be no small means of Vespasian's obtaining the government. Upon the whole, the case may be such that if we ourselves make farther delays, the Senate may choose an emperor whom the soldiers who are saviors of the empire will have in contempt.
So this is this grand speeches that he sort of is giving to the thing. Again, they're filled a lot with rhetoric and so on. But what Josephus is describing, again, shaped by hindsight, shaped by bias, but nonetheless, Josephus was there. So he must have been party to some of the discussions that was going on among the commanders of Vespasian about what will be. And notice, Vespasian's brother, who was an important public official, is in Rome in addition to Domitian and his other son. So he has people in Rome that he can use. All right?
I have to tell you, Rabbi.
Yeah.
I find this to be just ludicrous. I have no doubt that Vespasian orchestrated this. He planned it. There's no way some guy is going to go up to a command and say, "Sir, I want you to commit treason. I think you're the right guy to commit treason. I think the person who's there is just awful, and you're the man, and you should go do it."
Yeah, and the question is this treason now or not? I mean, that's
by
the
definition
point.
it's treason.
If
you're
the
going
Senate, well, I guess you're probably right. If the Senate has declared Vitellius emperor, then yeah, everybody should swear allegiance to him. But the point is, you're in a period of revolution. Who in fact is legitimate is completely up in the air at this point. It's who's the strongest gains legitimacy. Yeah.
I was going to say, I don't find it that ludicrous that you would say to somebody, go ahead and kill this guy, because as you're saying, everything is in flux, has been in flux so much that he's saying, this guy, is really not a good ruler. We'll be in deep trouble if this happens. I mean, that's how conspiracies come, and then you say, then you justify what you're doing.
The implication
and what I find ludicrous is how much he holds and is lauding Vespasian and Titus. I think that's looking back on what happened.
Well, they're his patrons.
Yeah, well, but I'm saying, he's saying,
Yeah.
Vespasian didn't succeed. There's no reason that at this point he should know for certain Vespasian is going to succeed.
No, he isn't.
But looking back at it.
Yes.
My attitude is the following: if a junior officer goes up to a senior officer and says, "Sir, I think you should knock off the emperor," then quite simply the the senior officer can say that is treason and kill him.
No,
Yeah,
but you,
but
have, you have
But you
people
don't go
in your.
that directly. You say,
No, but we're not.
"Let it
What we're
find
talking
out
about
how
here
he's
is
been feeling."
look, Vespasian knows he's got to have the support of the commanders of his legions. All right, and they're the guys who are going to most benefit, aside from Vespasian himself, from Vespasian becoming emperor. It means advancement for them. It means money and so forth. So, and the legionnaires themselves. I mean, he's got to get the rank and file behind him. I think you're partly right, Robert. In other words, Vespasian, when he sees what happens, first you get the death of Nero, and then you get Galba, and then you get Otho, and now you got Vitellius, and obviously not everybody's happy with Vitellius. So this is a time of revolution and civil war where all normal things are off. I'm reminded of this scene. Did any of you ever read the novel Shogun?
Oh,
Yeah, we-
years
Oh, a long,
ago.
long time
Yeah.
ago. So
Yeah.
a Shogun is
Yeah.
based on a real story where an English navigator comes with a Dutch ship to Japan. It's one of the first Westerners that comes to Japan precisely during the time when the shogunate is being fought over. So it's a good novel. I mean the movie version or it was a television version was okay. But anyway, the guy who's going to become the shogun questions the English guy, and he learns that the Dutch are in revolt against the Spanish emperor. And of course, to the shogun, how can you revolt against your lord? And he sort of demands from the English guy, how could, isn't this immoral that you have? And the English guy says, not if you win. And the guy starts to laugh because he realizes he's doing the same thing.
Yeah.
If you win, it's right.
But all these commanders or Vespasian, that they have men who are their advisors, and
Exactly.
that's not at all unusual.
He has a general staff. You have
And
to understand
they
that.
will talk to him about,
Exactly.
hey,
Yeah,
you're
they're discussing this,
nature
what
of
their
history.
feelings are.
yeah.
The nature of history is the leader leads and the rest follow.
I don't think
it's
so.
a delicate
I don't think
balance.
so.
It's a very delicate. In other words, if his officer said, this could really end badly, and the men are just not going to follow you, he couldn't have done it.
Yeah.
He couldn't have done it. Okay, so let's. Where are we? Oh yeah, so we are paragraph 4. Robert, you want to?
601?
Yeah, pick it up there. These are the discourses.
These were the discourses the soldiers had in their several companies, after which they got together in a great body, and encouraging one another, they declared Vespasian emperor.
So that's it. The legions declared him emperor in July of 69.
Are these all the legions, in the
His
various...
His legions in Judea.
His legions.
His legions in Judea. Now that's just, he's got a few of them, but it's not enough, right? Remember, Vitellius came off the Rhine with these battle-hardened Rhine legionnaires who've been fighting the Germans on and off. This is not so simple at this point. This is not a done deal. But as you will see, Vespasian shows himself to be incredibly canny as to how he becomes emperor. He is this is a model of a successful political campaign, political/military campaign. Read on, and exhorted him
To save the government which was now in danger. Now Vespasian's concern had been for a considerable time about the public. Yet did not he intend to set up for governor himself, though his action showed him to deserve it, which he preferred that safety which is in private life before the dangers in a state of such dignity. But when he refused the empire, the commanders insisted the more earnestly upon his acceptance, and the soldiers came about him with their drawn swords in their hands, and threatened to kill him unless he would now live according to his dignity. Yeah, sure. And when he had shown his reluctance a great while, and had endeavoured to thrust away this dominion from him, he at length, being not able to persuade them, yielded to their solicitations that would salute him emperor.
I love your reading, Robert. So dripping with sarcasm. Okay. So again,
Dripping.
Josephus this is the nobility of Vespasian, that he would rather be a private person in a quiet life and not be in the thick of the political things. Anything we know about him is he was already been very, very smart about his career, knowing when to withdraw from life when there's a possibility of getting caught up in all kinds of strange things, and coming back when it was advantageous to him. Not that he is not without skill. I mean, this is a guy who has a real military background. He is a skillful commander. That's the thing. He's not some guy who's in name only. He is a skillful commander. He's quite mature, as we know. He's in his 50s.
Rabbi, he won.
Well, I mean, Vitellius, by the way, was also a very skilled commander, but
Not
not a
as
good
skilled.
politician.
Now that's skilled.
All right, read on. So upon the exhortation...
So upon the exhortations of Mucianus and the other commanders,
Now, Mucianus is a very important commander in Vespasian's army.
that he would accept of the empire, and upon that of the rest of the army, who cried out that they were willing to be led against all his opposers, he was in the first place intent upon gaining the dominion over Alexandria, as known that Egypt was the greatest consequence, in order to obtain the entire government because of its supplying corn to Rome, which corn, if he could be master of, he hoped to dethrone Vitellius, supposing should aim to keep the empire by force, for he would not be able to support himself. If
Stop there. So he's very smart. He knows he's got to secure Egypt, because Egypt is one of the main supplies of grain for Rome. And as you will see, there are 2 legions there.
And because he was desirous to join the 2 legions that were at Alexandria to the other legions that were with him. He also considered with himself that he should then have that country for a defense to himself against the uncertainty of fortune. For Egypt is hard to be entered by land, and hath no good havens by sea.
Now, we're going to stop there for a moment. He then goes into this description of the land of Egypt, and how it's got a desert on one side and Nubia below and a desert on the other side, and how, in fact, there's no really good harbor there. Even Alexandria has a very tricky harbor to enter, which is true. So there's no natural port in Egypt, so that and we can skip all of that. Again, for people who are historians and archaeologists, this is really interesting stuff. And of course, there's been a huge amount of archaeology that's been done in the harbor of Alexandria because the water has risen since then.
I was going to say, they have to go underneath?
Oh yeah, there's like tons of stuff they have found in the last 10 years underneath in the water of Alexandria, stuff from the time of Cleopatra and so on. Huge amounts, because the sea has risen since then, or the land fell, and so a chunk of what was Alexandria at this time is underwater at the moment. And there's enormous amounts of archaeology going on there at the moment. Okay, so
But
let's...
I think it's fascinating that he figures this is his fallback.
Yes,
If all else fails,
he can defend Egypt.
I'll have Egypt.
Absolutely, and he's very smart, knowing that there are 2 legions there. There's the food supply he could cut off from Rome if he had to, which of course, that's kind of cruel, because who's going to suffer the most if he cuts the food supply from
Then
Rome,
he knows
right?
the people will revolt because they
Yeah, but
expect
then the
their
people will
handouts.
revolt because they don't
Exactly.
have
All right, so Jackie, do you want to pick it up, paragraph 6?
just
6 months.
This is again
6:16.
book 4, chapter 10, paragraph 6, line 616.
Okay. Justly, therefore, did Vespasian desire to obtain that government in order to corroborate his attempts upon the whole of the empire. So he immediately sent to Tiberius Alexander, who was then governor of Egypt, and to Alexandria, and informed him what the army had put him upon, and how he, being forced to accept of the burden of the government, was desirous to have him for his confederate and supporter. Now, as soon as ever Alexander had read this letter, he readily obliged the legions and the multitude to take the oath of fidelity to Vespasian, both whom willingly complied with him, as already acquainted with the courage of the man, for that his conduct in their neighborhood.
Okay, so who's our Tiberius Alexander? the nephew of Philo,
nephew, right.
who had been the procurator of Judea for a few years and now was in the very powerful position of the governor of Egypt, and had put down a local revolt against his own community and slain thousands of people with the legions. So Tiberius is also a very ambitious guy and sees a real opportunity here to move up the ladder further from governor to right-hand man of the emperor.
Yes.
And in fact, that's exactly what happens. Tiberius Alexander, after Vespasian becomes emperor and Titus takes over the command of the forces in Judea, Tiberius Alexander becomes the number 2 man of the army in Judea. And we think from other sources that in fact he ended his career as the head of the Praetorian Guard under the Flavians. For a Jew to have gone up to that level was unheard of. But of course he completely went over to the Romans many years before and abandoned his own community in any way whatsoever.
Yeah.
But if he ended up as the head of the Praetorian Guard, he did pretty damn well for himself in his life by Roman standards.
Oh, yeah.
He really did.
Oh, yeah.
But the fact that he was the second in command when the temple was destroyed shows you just how far he went from his own community. All right? Okay, go on. Accordingly, Vespasian.
Accordingly, Vespasian, looking upon himself as already entrusted with the government, got all things ready for his journey to Rome. Now fame carried this news abroad more suddenly than one could have thought, that he was emperor over the East, upon which every city kept festivals and celebrated sacrifices and oblations for such good news.
So apparently the news spreads like wildfire, which is not...
And everybody's
and
happy.
everybody is thrilled, okay? They're having festivals, whatever. Now this comes the critical point. The legions...
The legions also that were in Mysia and Pannonia, who had been in commotion
Where are those, Rabbi?
a little before on account of this insolent attempt of Vitellius, were very glad to take the oath of fidelity
Those are the Danube
to
legions.
Vespasian.
Pannonia is here, what we would call, in the Balkan area, Bosnia,
So
Serbia.
this was the critical event.
Yes,
the
this was a
legions
very
came
critical
up.
event. The legions on the Danube have now declared allegiance to Vespasian, whose power base at this point has been further east.
Well,
This is really the moment where he wins.
The cynic amongst us would ask, I wonder what he offered those legions.
Well, what did he offer the commander?
Yeah. Yeah.
What did he offer the commander, who we will learn, who will show up? But the point is, on our chart here, if you go to page 2, this happens in August of 69. The Danubian legions announce support to Vespasian, and what do? We're going to find out that Vespasian is going to move to Beirut and is greeted by numerous embassies. Mucianus, the governor of Syria, and also gives him support. But what's going to happen is that soon after the Danube legions show support, they invade Italy. So this is a very careful campaign, right? They're coming down from the northeast into Italy through what we would call today
It was a pincer attack.
Croatia's.
It was a pincer attack. He came up, Vespasian came up
Well,
from
you'll
the east
see.
as well.
You'll see what happens. But these guys are the ones who are closest geographically. Easy. Don't forget, because the legions in Judea and Alexandria and Syria, they would have to be transported either by sea or by very long march up through. It would take them months and months, whereas the Danube legions are right there practically. Not, weeks as opposed to months. All right, go on.
Who had been in commotion with fidelity to Vespasian upon his coming to the empire. Vespasian then removed from Caesarea to Berytus.
That's Beirut, what we call Beirut today.
Where many ambassadors came to him from Syria and many other provinces, bringing with them from every city crowns and congratulations of the people. Mucianus, came also, who was the president of the province, and told him with
What alacrity.
the people received the news of his advancement and how the people of every city had taken the oath of fidelity to him.
Okay, so he's now got the whole East is in uprising for him. The Danube legions. He has built himself. He's now built himself by August of 69. He had, and again, this is only within a very short period of time. And when you think about it, Vitellius is proclaimed legion by the Rhine legions in January. Galba is killed. He becomes emperor in April. And so what you've got is less than 6 months, only a few months later, Vespasian's on the way to becoming emperor. He's got a huge support amongst the Roman legions and commanders and governors, and is ready to begin moving into attack mode. All right. Phyllis, you want to pick it up in number 7 now?
Sure. So Vespasian's good fortune succeeded to his wishes everywhere, and the public affairs were, for the greatest part, already in his hands, upon which he considered that he had not arrived at the government without divine providence, but that a righteous kind of fate had brought the empire under his power.
And here again is Josephus's notion that this must be, and of course this appeals to the Romans' ideas,
Right.
that there's some kind of divine process at work that brought him. And then what happens is, we can skip the next part, and this is where Josephus is freed, because he says, he remembers how Josephus,
Where are you up to, Rabbi?
we're just further down on the same page and then over the next page. This is when he frees Josephus, because he remembers that Josephus had predicted
Prophesied.
what was going to happen. Okay, so now we are in August, September or so of 69, and Vespasian is now moving. So Phyllis, pick it up, chapter 11. Paragraph 1, line 630 on page 832. And now
when Vespasian had given answers to the embassiges
embassies, yeah.
and had disposed of the places of power justly, and according to everyone's deserts, he came to Antioch, and consulting which way he had best take, he preferred to go to Rome rather than to march to Alexandria, because he saw that Alexandria was sure to him already, but that the affairs at Rome were put into disorder by Vitellius.
Now remember, Antioch is the capital of Syria. It is the capital of the eastern provinces, really. Okay? I mean, it is, after Alexandria, it's the biggest city in the east. All right, so
he sent Mucianus to Italy and committed a considerable army, both of horsemen and footmen, to him.
actually what we know is it wasn't a large force. It was what we would call light troops. Right? He wanted to get them there fast to get to Italy. Go on.
Yet was Mucianus afraid of going by sea, because it was the middle of winter.
Yeah, this doesn't. Well, it's late summer. I don't know. Anyway, the weather I don't know what the sea conditions in the Mediterranean. But anyway, Mucianus decides he's going to go by land.
So he led his army on foot through Cappadocia and Phrygia.
Meaning he went up through Turkey and was going to go through Greece and kind of go that way. Go on.
In the meantime, Antonius Primus took the third of the legion that were in Mysia, for he was president of that province, and made haste in order to fight Vitellius. Whereupon Vitellius sent away Caecina with a great army, having a mighty confidence in him because of his having beaten Otho.
So here it is. Vitellius, the Danubian legions are now invading Italy from the north, and Vitellius sends his best commander north from Rome with his legions, and they're going to meet. Go on.
This Caecina marched out of Rome in great haste and found Antonius about Cremona in Gaul, which city is in the borders of Italy.
Cremona was in ruins at this point, though, from the previous months.
But when he saw there that the enemy were numerous and in good order, he durst not fight them. And as he thought a retreat dangerous, so he began to think of betraying his army to Antonius.
Antonius Primus, who is this who is the governor of the Danubian legions, a well-trusted and hardened commander. Go on.
Accordingly, he assembled the centurions and tribunes that were under his command and persuaded them to go over to Antonius, and this by diminishing the reputation of Vitellius and by exaggerating the power of Vespasian. He also told them that with the one there was no more than the bare name of dominion, but with the other was the power of it, and that it was better for them to prevent necessity and gain favor, and while they were likely to overcome in battle, to avoid the danger beforehand, and go over to Antonius willingly, that Vespasian was able of himself to subdue what had not yet submitted without their assistance, while Vitellius could not preserve what he had already with it.
So it shows you Vitellius didn't really have a lot of, his commander didn't have a lot of faith in him. And so I guess in Latin his name would be Caecina. Caecina decides to go over to the other side, but he's got to convince his own commanders of this, who've been loyal to Vitellius up until this point, right? So he tries to get them, all right, it's better to go over to Vespasian than to fight a bloody battle, where we're probably going to lose in the end. Go on.
Caecina said this and much more to the same purpose, and persuaded them to comply with him, and both he and his army deserted. But still the very same night the soldiers repented of what they had done, and a fear seized on them, lest perhaps Vitellius, who sent them, should get the better. And drawing their swords, they assaulted Caecina in order to kill him, and the thing had been done by them, if the tribunes had not fallen upon their knees and besought them not to do it.
Now the tribunes are the next highest levels of the commanders in the armies before the centurions. So, the soldiers decided this is a stupid thing and they're going to kill their own commander, but the tribunes are saying don't do this. Go on.
So the soldiers did not kill him, but put him in bonds as a traitor, and were about to send him to Vitellius. When Antonius Primus heard of this, he raised up his men immediately, and made them put on their armor, and led them against those that had revolted. Hereupon they put themselves in the order of battle, and made resistance for a while, but was soon beaten, and fled to Cremona. Then did Primus take his horsemen, and cut off his entrance into the city, and encompassed and destroyed a great multitude of them before the city, and fell into the city together with the rest, and gave leave to his soldiers to plunder it. So he made the soldiers happy.
Yes, that's how you kept them on their side. That's how they got
Makes
paid.
sense, because it's already destroyed.
Well, yeah, I don't know whether,
What is it
from Tacitus, Tacitus claims the city was really burned to the ground in the previous fighting, so who knows, but the point is...
But if there were still people living there trying
Yeah,
to get their
it's
lives
pretty-
together.
It's pretty hard to destroy a city completely, so there must have been, it probably wasn't as bad as Tacitus said, yeah.
And here it was that many strangers, who were merchants as well as many of the people of that country, perished, and among them Vitellius' whole army, being 30,200, while Antonius lost no more than those that came with him from Mysia, than 4,500. He then loosed Caecina and sent him to Vespasian to tell him the good news. So he came and was received by him, and covered the scandal of his treachery by the unexpected honors he received from Vespasian.
Okay, so what happens is this is called the Second Battle of Bedriacum, pretty much in the same area, and Marcus Antonius Primus crushes the army of Vitellius. I mean, that it's really over at that point. Okay, so now the situation is moves to Rome, and Josephus is giving a pretty good blow-by-blow account of what happened at this point. Yeah, Jackie.
Well, I was just saying the numbers of the soldiers, though. Can we consider them exaggerated?
Probably, but
I
it
mean,
was-
populations weren't that large at that time.
Well, it depends. I mean, if
How do you raise
Vitellius's
30,000?
army had 3 legions, that could be about 30,000 men. And in a rout, I mean, it's not impossible that they killed that many. But very likely, what happens is that they scatter. But the fact is, it was a crushing defeat.
Yeah.
The Rhine legions got really badly crushed at this point. By the Danubian legions, okay, and partly because of this maybe internal, that they didn't know whether to fight or not. They caught them unawares. Who knows? The point is, and again, Tacitus has a much more detailed account of this particular fight. Okay, so Jackie, read a little further, and now.
Me?
Oh, sorry,
Okay.
Phyllis.
And now upon the news that Antonius was approaching, Sabinus took courage at Rome, and assembled those cohorts of soldiers that kept watch by night, and in the night time seized upon the capital. And as the day came on, many men of character came over to him, with Domitian, his brother's son, whose encouragement was of very great weight for encompassing the government.
Sabinus was Vespasian's brother. So Sabinus and Domitian get the local Roman guards, because there was a force. This was not the Praetorian Guard. This was a group of guards of the city. We would call it the police force, basically, to come over to him, and a lot of other men of weight in the senators and others and prominent people are now seeing which way the wind's blowing. And Vitellius apparently had not been doing very well in Rome himself, and there was a lot of discontent because he brought his army in there. And so you guys can wait a few more minutes because we started a bit late. Is that all right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So there's look how smart this is. Vespasian's got this force coming from the east under Mucianus. He's got Antonius Primus coming with the biggest numbers of troops from the north. Crushing the forces. He's got people in Rome. He himself has not moved. He's letting everybody else do this for him. He's not going to go to Rome until Rome is secured. This is really good because the blood's not on his hands.
Well, that's also, and he's safe in case things don't go as well as he planned.
Exactly, but by being at a distance, he can say, "Hey, I wasn't responsible for these guys getting slaughtered, right?"
I wasn't there.
No, it's very canny about how he sort of is being very careful about where he himself is versus his people who represent him. All right. Why don't we, Ellie, you want to start reading it? The line 647, let's move the recorder a little further along. Robert, it's in front of you. You can just pass it up there.
Vitellius was not much surprised at this promise, but was very angry that those who had revolted with Sabinus, and thirsting out of his natural barbarity after noble blood, he sent out that part of the army which came along with him to fight against the capital.
Now, what happened is Sabinus captured the capital. If you've ever been to Rome, you know that there is now on top, there's the big museum on top of what's called the Capitol. Mm-hmm. That was kind of like the center of the Roman government at the time, and a very defensible hill. So Vitellius still has forces at his command, so he's now going to attack Sabinus and the forces on the capital. Go on. And many bold actions.
And many bold actions were done on this side and on the side of those that held the temple.
That was the main temple of Rome, was on the capital.
But at last the soldiers that came from Germany, being too numerous for the others, got the hill into their possession.
So the German legions, soldiers who were still in Rome, they captured the capital, and read on where Domitian
with the other of the principal Romans providentially escaped, while the rest of the multitude were entirely cut to pieces, and Sabinus himself was brought to Vitellius and then slain.
So Vespasian's brother was murdered by Vitellius. Read on. The soldiers
also plundered the temple of its ornaments and set it on fire.
This is a horrible thing, right? The most important, the center religiously of Rome is destroyed by Vitellius's legions from Germany. Go on.
But now within a day's time came Antonius with his army, and were met by Vitellius and his army, and having a battle in three several places, the last were all destroyed.
So there's this battle that takes place, and again, the Danubian legions crushed the rest of Vitellius's army. Go on.
Then did Vitellius come out of the palace, in his cups insatiated with an exaggerant and luxurious meals in the last extremity, and being drawn along by the multitude and abused with all sorts of torments, had his head cut off in the midst of Rome, having retained the government 8 months and 5 days. And had he lived much longer, I cannot but think the empire would not have been sufficient for his lust. Of the others that were slain were numbered about 50,000.
Okay, let's stop there for a minute. We'll sum up and finish. So what happens is,
Well, can I have my book? I have to go.
yes, okay, sorry. At this particular point, so October is when the forces, October 69 is when the forces of Antonius Primus crushed the army of Vitellius at the second battle of Bideriacum, and it's not until December 21st that Vitellius is murdered by the mob. And then in December 22nd, the people of Rome declare Vespasian emperor, the Senate and everybody else, because Vitellius is dead. And the next day, Mucianus arrives with his forces, and he supports Vespasian's nephew, it's actually his son Domitian, as acting emperor until Vespasian can arrive. So the point is, by December 22nd, Vespasian is declared emperor. He hears the news. He's gone to Alexandria. He's moved now back to Alexandria, where he's preparing to go to Rome himself with his legions. And he sails to Rome as soon as the winter is over, and in the process dispatches Titus to go to resume the siege. So by the end of 69, by the end of December 69, the year of the four emperors is over. Vespasian has secured the imperial throne. The war is over. He then appoints Titus, and Titus is now going to prepare to resume the fight against Jerusalem, which will be the second to last stage of the war. The last stage being the reduction of Masada and a couple of the other fortresses. But now the scene is going to shift back to Judea. And so what we'll do is next time we will pick it up with looking at Suetonius's discussion of Titus, because I think it's interesting to sort of see who this guy was, who's going to be the commander and ultimately the successor to his father. By the way, one interesting point about Titus, he will be the first Roman emperor to be the son, the legitimate blood son of the previous emperor. None of the other emperors were the sons of the previous emperors. This is the first time this happens.
So what Josephus said was, about the father and the son is
Interesting is Titus only rules as an emperor for like 2 or 3 years, and then he dies, and his brother Domitian takes over. But the point is, it's important to look at Suetonius' account of him, because when we actually see what Josephus says about him, you will see that Josephus takes every opportunity to praise Titus, which I think is really important for our view of how Josephus shapes this particular history. So we'll see you next week. Hopefully I will get both recordings to you by before the next class. It takes a long time to do them.